All right, here's your Nigeria history and government structure. A quick overview of the past and how that has led to their government structure. First off, they were a colonial piece of Britain, 1860 to 1960. Uh, the British established trading outlets there for all the natural resources. So the British influenced mostly in the south along the coast. They put religion in there, Christianity. Um, they put some Nigerians in charge of some of the bureaucracies that they had, um, but they left the north areas to kind of govern themselves, and that area was more of a Muslim territory. So they tried to instill a Western style education. The focus on education created elites who then kind of viewed themselves as better than others and that they deserved more and had better economic ties. A lot of Christian missionaries were in Nigeria. They set up things like elementary schools and churches. So then there was naturally a rift between the North and the South, where the South was getting a lot of these resources and British schools and education, and the North was not. So when the era finally ended, post World War II, um, there was an increase in civil society organizations. People were forming different councils and things like that. The British government attempted to deal with the rising tide of activism and strikes and competition by creating different bodies that people could be represented in, formalizing the decentralized nature of their imperial rule through the idea of federalism, so having local control. Again, there's a lot of ethnic divides, nationalism, different boundaries were created, but they didn't weren't created uh, by the ethnicities, or they always divided these ethnicities. So in 1960, after colonial rule, the first republic was formed in Nigeria. First off, they're looking at the kind of the impact for both Great Britain and Nigeria, two of our AP6 countries. In Great Britain, multi-ethnic and multi-racial society was created because of these colonies, and people would go to the UK from these colonies. But it created an idea of xenophobia, so an intense or irrational dislike or fear of people from other countries. Um, so there was kind of a resurgence in nationalism as well. In Nigeria, things like colonial rule created regional identities. Like I said, the Christianity in the South, but they also did create things like bureaucracy. They had provided a language, boundaries, um, but even after colonialism, these colonies, so Nigeria, was still being exploited. So, what is a regime change? Change occurs when a country's political institutions and practices, so going from maybe, for example, totalitarian to a democratic rule, actually change. Okay? And a lot of times this happened in Nigeria by a coup d'etat, so a move in which the military forces take control of the government by force. However, this does not necessarily mean it's a regime change because it could go from totalitarian to totalitarian. But if it went from totalitarian to democratic, then it'd be a regime change. A government change would be when it just be changing the leader of the government. So looking at the First Republic, didn't last long. Uh, Tafawa Balewa, he was the leader. There's a lot of political infighting. There's tensions between the different ethnicities. The North was dominant here. There's a lot of different electoral discrepancies and electoral dysfunction. Each region was viewed the state as a means to siphon off the wealth. So they were really just trying to get wealthy for themselves. The Igbos, they are um, a group that was led by some army officers. Uh, this is Ironsi. Okay, he staged a coup d'etat. He assassinates the prime minister at that time. He wants to end federalism and the northern dominance. Again, there's infighting, northern Muslims versus the eastern Igbos. So there's two different ethnicities here. The coup failed. Ironsi was then assassinated. So the individual that take over the government, was then eventually assassinated, and a new military dictatorship um, by Gowon was then put into place. So a lot of change there after the First Republic in 1960 to 1966. Biafra is one of your locations, kind of another social cleavage here. The Igbo broke away from Nigeria. This is where they live. There was a 3-year war. They lose Nigeria in 1970, so a lot of individuals lose. And think about this in the AP6 countries, um, other conflicts like this, so like in Tibet, in China, and Chechnya in Russia. Military plays a huge role in Nigeria. Um, Again, compared to some other countries like Mexico, they're uh, dominant, northern dominates this section. There's military and government versus military and barracks. So military and government meaning the president being a military leader, commander in chief. Military and barracks is the military not holding high political position, being just the military. So military and government, this commander in chief comes from the military, then takes over the government and runs the government as well as running all the institutions of the military. Where military and barracks, those military individuals um, are just in the military and they take orders. So Gowon, he was in charge from 66 to 75. He's a military leader, promised to return all the rule to the civilians so they can make it everything nice and then kind of give power to the people. Um, he broke Nigeria into federal states, trying to weaken some of these ethnic powers. And then he shifted from agriculture and industrialization through import substitution. So, import substitution, replacing foreign imports with domestic production, based on the premise that a country should attempt to reduce its foreign dependency through the local production of industrialized goods. So it creates jobs in the short run. Output and growth will slow and be low, and then they can't really compete anymore because there's no competition to reduce those costs. And they were relying really on oil. So this was 1966 to 1975. Under his rule, again, he came to power with popular support, trying to give it back to the people. But again, he was an authoritarian regime and lacked rule of law, so he didn't really follow the rules that were written down. Oil revenues then were siphoned off towards his leaders. He was using that, and he was overthrown in a coup d'etat, but it was bloodless, so there wasn't as much fighting there and deaths. This idea of Prebendalism then is your Nigerian patron-client system, personalized system of rule in which all public offices are treated as personal fiefdoms. You have a little fiefdom. These leaders try to make connections, help each other out. They can become larger and larger, and they're based on loyalty. And local government officials use this to support their villages, but it also supports a lot of corruption. 75 to 76, you have Muhammad began to crack down on corruption, took steps necessary for the return of civilian law, but then he was assassinated in a coup attempt. Then Obasanjo comes into power, 76 to 79. He continued Muhammad's plans for the return of civilian rule. He gave up power in 79, respected the rule of law. So he did give it back to the people. A lot of organizations came to power, NGOs such as the World Health Organization. He was beloved by Nigerians. And again, he was a general. The Second Republic, then 79 to 83, a new constitution was put into place. Shagre, he was from the north, parliamentarian system replaced by a presidential system. No majority party could form a government, so they had tried to put a parliamentarian system into place, but they couldn't have one party get a majority, so they put a presidential system in place. Wanted to strengthen the federal government, but dropping oil prices kind of hurt the government there. He tried to stay in power, even though he wasn't supposed to, by rigging elections, but the military then stepped in. So we have Buhari, 84 to 85, overthrew that Second Republic because it was corrupt, but he still had a bad human rights record. Any attack on the government by journalists, he put him in jail. He was got rid of by a coup d'etat. Uh, Binga, he was a Muslim from the north, 85 to 93, loaded the military with northerners. Um, he worked on a structural adjustment program with IMF and World Bank to get money into the country. However, it worsened the lives of the individuals because they'd have to pay that back again. So restructuring diversify the economy is what he really wanted to do, so that it could decrease its dependence on oil, but and also reduce government spending. Welcomed opponents into the government as well. The Third Republic, Babangida, kind of annulled the next elections, tried to stay in power, never really got started. There's protest strikes. Thought people thought there was going to be civil war. He was forced to step down, and then a caretaker government to kind of gap that bridge was put into place. Abacha, he was then put into place 93 to 98. He overthrew the caretaker civilian government again, and then he regularly used violence. He jailed a lot of his opponents, including Obasanjo. Again, he was Babinga's number 2.